My name is Jacob. I live in Portland, Oregon, and I like retro video games. And I actually run a YouTube channel called 8bitjoystick Retro Video Games. And about 15, 20 years ago, I had a blog called 8bitjoystick. It was sort of like an early time in the 2000s where, these retro video games were only a couple decades old or under a decade old. And then I stopped doing that, went to nursing school, and then decided to get back into creating, instead of writing articles about retro video games, making videos about them. So I started making YouTube videos a little over a year ago. And slowly but surely, people have been watching them. I try to make one video a week. It's been tough, but it's been a lot of fun.
And what inspired you to start making videos about retro consoles?
Well, it's funny. I'm, 45, so I remember a lot of these when these game systems came out. So they are retro in that they're an old-fashioned style, but if you are old enough to remember when something was new, it still seems like impressive technology to you. So when I was a kid, my first video game system was the ColecoVision, which was an American-only video game system. The Atari 2600 was popular at the time, and then later on moved to Nintendo. And so it's always something that I found fascinating, and I always found video game, both in playing it and also creating games, was interesting. And I almost wanted to make video games for a great many years. So you're actually making video games, so I greatly admire that. But it doesn't really seem old to me because I remember when it was new. But what gets me is how many in these years. I'm amazed how many video games there are, from the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s, and even the 2000s. So I'm amazed at how many games there are, and it's you sort of think that the past is a limited amount, but I'm always discovering fun things to write about.
Yeah, on your YouTube channel, you have videos about almost all the retro consoles and retro games. How are you doing it?
Well, there's still a ton that I haven't talked about. It's going to take me a while, and my father likes to read history books about World War II, and I was joking with him, saying, "Oh, you got a new book. Has history changed? Is there any has the war changed? It's been, does this book end differently?" And he said, "Well, no, people are history. There's so much, and you're always reading something about a different perspective. So I think it's funny that there's a limited amount of old games, but people are still coming up with new things to say about them."
Yes, and I think for younger people, I am also younger than you, but I think it's very interesting to look into the history and see what was happening before today, before modern times.
Well, and especially also, I think video games are technology or an art form that is tied to the technology. We have to have the technical development, which shapes the artistic things that are on it. So it's fascinating to see the two, how the two work together. The technical limitations and the that I find fascinating. How the creative people were able to get around, to work on, what they're able to make on such limited, like this video game system, the Game Boy right here. Hold on, let me turn the volume down. It's funny. We live in a time when my microwave oven probably has a stronger CPU. But it's amazing that we have people who are able to make creative things on working with the technical limitations, and I find that fascinating.
Yeah, for example, now when I'm making the game, you can really feel the hardware limitations compared to modern time. One of the things is the price of the flash chips on a cartridge where we are saving the games, so our games can be much bigger than they used to be before, like 30 years ago. When are you making videos about all the consoles? Do you have some preferred ones, some of your favorites?
Well, probably my favorite console that I had to play is the Nintendo's 8-bit hardware, specifically the NES and the Famicom. And growing up, it was very much focused on the American NES. And so I find it fascinating to, as I get older, to get into Famicom and to find out more about what was done in different parts of the world. And so I'm always interested to find games that I would have been interested in a kid, but I didn't know about at the time.
So how are you deciding about what is going to be the next video?
I have a list of, I have a list of ideas that I want to make videos about. And so I have a list of potential videos ideas, and I always will have to write them. And so I'll sort of decide which ones do I want to do, and I'll spend a while researching, and then usually I'll want to make a video about a couple games, and I'll play and record them and take notes and write, and then put together a script. And so I try to do it on like a series of games, of ones I think that people would be interested in.
So are you collecting the consoles, or do you own all the consoles you are making videos about?
I have a lot of them. I try to capture on a regular hardware if I can. I have but sometimes it's easier to use emulation to try and capture. I use a video capture device, and so I usually have like a RetroPie and hook that up to a capture device. Or I recently got an analog pocket and started connecting that up to a capture device. But it's luckily there's really good ways to, and sometimes if I want to write about a Game Boy, I'll go and actually use a camera and try and also get video capture, but also to hold up to, because what it looks like on the screen is different. And there are some times that, as you can see, I have my CRT TV. And sometimes I'll go and have my camera in front of the TV because I wanted to show what it looks like on a CRT TV. So I try to use original hardware when I can, and when I'm not, the software works good. It's all about playing the games, not about how you go about getting them.
And before our recording, you told me you have a box of your favorite games and books. Do you have there something real special?
For books or games? What? One second. For books, my inspirations for making YouTube videos is a gentleman by the name of Jeremy Parrish, and and he actually has written books on retro video games, and he's much more of a scholar, and so he makes a series of books, and I actually got a book signed by him and got to meet him and tell him that he was a source of inspiration. So he wrote a good book on the Sega SG-1000, which is a console that I am interested in, but it was very, very rare in Japan. And it's very hard to get in the U.S. So I'm rather read his book on it than go down the rabbit hole trying to collect for SG-1000.
So since when are you playing the games on the consoles?
Well, the crazy thing is, before I started playing, making YouTube videos, I actually had a lot more time to play. But since I try and make a YouTube video about once a week, I usually will play a game for a while, for like a day, and record, and then it's doing it for research, and then also try and like take notes. But it's also important to just play games for fun. So in your questions, you said, can you share a memorable story or experience that you had with a retro game as a child? So in America, we had Atari was hugely important. It was the big video game company that got very popular. That, there was the Fairchild Channel F, but it was the Atari 2600, which was the big video game system. And that led to Atari's corporate, basically they had financial problems, and all of these other game companies lost a whole bunch of money. And there's what was called the Great Video Game Crash of 1983. And I remember, so like Atari went out of business, and then all these other game companies went out of business. And so I remember the retail store, this gentleman that was selling games is, all right, kid, buy the Atari games, because there's never going to be any more video game consoles after this. And it's true. From 1983 until around 1987, there were no new video game consoles and no new video games. So it went from being very popular to nothing. And then sort of Nintendo came back. So that was that was a weird thing to see and experience, is have all the video game systems, like video games as a console, like when was the industry sort of fell out in America for about 3 years. So it was fascinating.
That's funny, because I am from Czech Republic, which is like Center Eastern Europe, and we didn't have any of these consoles or anything.
Yes.
Our story is completely different.
Yes, let me be right back. 1 second. So being from the Czech Republic, or you being from the Czech Republic, this is a bootleg Dendy system. And so I did a video about Dendy, and I thought it was fascinating about all of these, what it must have been like for children that grew up in the former Soviet Union not having video games, or having video games be very, very rare. And then after, the revolution happened in Russia, and then there was and the former Soviet Union collapsed, and then there was this company called Dendy who made, Nintendo was not interested in moving into this part of the world. And so they made game systems that appealed to that kids in Eastern Europe and former Soviet Union could buy. And it was interesting to, we got in the West video games every year, but then they got them all at once. Yeah. So do you remember the time when you first saw, like, did you grow up before video games, or do you remember that when that happened?
So I have a very special situation, because my father used to have a computer for his job, and I used to play there Wolfenstein 3D. And I remember it was very special to have a computer for gaming. It was very expensive. And to set the scene somehow about the consoles, in Czech Republic we have very big community of Vietnamese people, and when they came to Czech Republic, they started shops with everything, and they started selling these copies of Nintendo Entertainment Systems. And I used to have one which was like keyboard with a slot for the cards. Later I discovered this is some kind of a Chinese like educational computer which is supposed to go around the Chinese ban against the gaming consoles. But there used to be really a lot of types of these kind of consoles, and I remember the stacks of cartridges, like boxes full of yellow cartridges in the boxes. Yeah,
yellow bootleg cartridges. But so it's fascinating because Nintendo, there was parts of the world where these what was considered piracy at the time, but so Dendy created and they didn't have permission, but then later on they got permission. And so I think it's fascinating to see people who grew up with retro video games in a different way, and just want to realize for them is like that experience is very very important, and just as important as someone who grew up in America versus in Japan.
Well, in our part of the world, in Czech Republic, I know, for example, no one who had the first Xbox. We had always PlayStation 1, not even original Game Boy. I think only few people who bring it from Germany. But everybody started kind of with the first PlayStation and the Game Boy Color. But they used to be super expensive at the time, so not much people used to have it.
That's the other thing is like whether it can be affordable and get people can actually get it. And so that's why it's interesting that we live in a time when I had when I was a kid, very little access to video games, and now I had a whole bunch of time, and so now I have all this access to video games and little time to play them. So that's what I want to do in my channel, is try and tell people about, okay, here's a game series that you might not know about and you might want to spend your time on.
What do you think about influence of old gaming on modern games, or do you think modern games should be more influenced by the old games or the opposite?
Well, absolutely. I mean, when you have a video game, like I said, it's like, so you have to have the technical limitations will affect your artistic choices. And so in doing so, the game creators have to get more that try and make something that they can with that works on the limitations. And all video games are based on things. A lot of art is based on iterative process for the stuff that came before it. So you absolutely have to play games from old-fashioned styles into influencing modern game design. What's fascinating is I love the term retro, and I also hate it at the same time. So retro can mean a new game, like of an old-fashioned style, and it's a descriptive word. And so it can mean of an old style. So an old game is of an old style, but a new game that is in an old-fashioned style is also considered retro. So your game, year 2031, it is an actual retro game because it is new in an old-fashioned style. And so I'm actually really excited to see that there are retro games being made for PlayStation and PC and modern platforms, but also there are some people, some madmen such as yourself, who are actually made new games for older systems. And I had that. I reviewed Kudzu, and then there was Project Blue, which was a very fun new game. And I'm currently reviewing Garbage Pail Kids, which was a new NES game. So I'm glad to see that people are making new retro games on new platforms and new retro games on old platforms.
Well, for example, I was very surprised when I released my first game. I expected everybody is going to buy digital version because they're not going to have consoles, the Game Boy. But maybe like 80% of the copies what I sold was physical copies with the cartridges and boxes.
Yeah. What do you mean no one has a Game Boy? So I have my original Game Boy. Got this recently. Have the Game Boy Color. Have Game Boy Pocket. The Analog Pocket. This is a lot of fun. It's FPGA. Game Boy Advance. Game Boy Advance SP. Modified Game Boy Advance SP. Game Boy Micro. I actually turned this on by mistake. Let's see, what else? And then, of course, you have Mew Mini emulator and Funny Playing FPGA. So there's all these, I'm glad that there's all these different ways to play, old games on, but I'm glad that people are connecting to playing on real cartridges and real buttons.
Yeah, the real buttons are always better than, for example, touchscreen.
Well, it's different, but I'm glad. But there's something about having, and I sort of said this in one of my videos. This generation of people who grew up with a lot of digital things, but when you have a cartridge, you have a physical representation of your time with the game. So, like, I have an emulator that has, 30,000 games on here, but it doesn't seem quite as real about having a physical version in your hand that represents the physical thing that your time with the game.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying with my games, to be like physical thing, what stays here with us forever. Not like modern games what you rent out and in 3 years they just turn off the servers and you lose the game. Also, I'm trying a little bit of reach from the digital world of my game into the real world. For example, the poster what I send you of my game, which is like newsletter from the in-game world, where you can find a little bit more information about the game, about the world, and some helps and tips also.
I like to keep a coffee mug with the Game Boy games that I'm currently playing. So there's my big bins of cartridges, but these are my coffee mug with the actual games that I'm playing. But I am glad that you do have a digital version. So you have someone who, it's good to have both, so that there's, someone who can, because there are times it's like, I don't know if I can spend $70 or $50 on a physical copy, but I can definitely give them $5 to $10 and get the digital version. So it's fun to have, an EverDrive and pay for something and then play it on regular hardware is cool.
Oh yes, it is. The digital, when it's yours, truly yours, it's okay. Do you have some special games what you would like to recommend?
Well, there's currently I'm doing a video series on a Game Boy collection where Konami made games and released them and changed them. But there's there's a ton of games that let's see. So there's sort of like the term hidden gem. A hidden gem is a game that is good that a lot of people don't know about, and so sometimes we like to find them and make videos about them. And one that worked for me is was called Better in Japan, and I researched some games that had a lot of regional differences. And one of the big regional differences is in America, we tended to move on to newer game systems and get rid of older game systems. And some of the best games made for a game system are later on in life and towards the end, because the more as the game developers can have the time to make them. And so there are some really good games for like on NES, like Mighty Final Fight, which is very expensive for the American. It's the expensive games are the ones that are rare and good, or sometimes it's just the amount of people collecting real things is the amount of price to some people. So I like to do ones on the Japanese version where you can get a Japanese version of the cartridge for like $10, $15, $20, while the American version is $200.
Yeah, I have also some games in Japanese, also games in German, but they will basically worthless. If they will be in English, it will be much better.
Well, just less. And then there are times that I've seen the incredible thing about the internet is so that you have people all around the world that have a similar hobby. And so I can order my Japanese copies of a game and get them sent, but also learn about like how the COVID shutdown affected Japanese video game prices because they had travel restrictions. So they had all these fans that could no longer go to Japan and buy them. So their games went down in price. And in the U.S., everyone started staying at home and buying more, and so these went up in price. And so now the travel restrictions, people can go to Japan and buy games, and so now the prices are rising up. And it's funny to see these Japanese video game nerds are saying, "Oh, these Americans are coming and buying up all our Game Boys," and I'm like, guilty. But it's great to see Western nerds connect, and I actually made my video about the Dendy, and it was really great to have some people that grew up with the Dendy come and comment on the video. So it is exciting to see people living all around the world and uniting over our love of these old games.
Yeah, like us, and that also explains the internet connection that we have. Do you have some tips and recommendations how to start collecting the consoles?
Well, okay, so some people like to what I call box collectors. People that like, they want to like, do you want to? For advice, I'd say go after the games that you care about, and don't just buy them to have and get it complete. There are some people that like called the thrill of the hunt, and they like going out and they want to get all of them. They want to get the complete run. And my place isn't that big. I don't have this place to spend it and the time. And so I am more focused on collecting the games that I want to play. So I only try to buy the games that I really want to play. But so that is my advice: is try and think about what is important to you. And I originally thought, I'm not going to buy the American NES games, and then I made, but this game was not released in Japan, so I can't get a Japanese version. And then it's like, okay, I'll get one that has a more of a regional difference. But again, I would decide to only make exceptions to get ones that you care about.
Yeah, but now the retro games and consoles are getting super expensive. Like a few years ago, I decided I'm going to collect all the Pokemon games and Game Boy related stuff. I got first and second generation of Pokemon games, but now the third generation and more, it's super expensive. I don't even want to spend money for it because it's ridiculous.
Well, and then they have, but it's connected to what people are, what's important to them. And it's fascinating to see how Pokemon, the amount of time that people spend with them, will go and try to restore batteries and whatnot and try and keep their old Pokemon around. And so I think it's fast. One thing that I thought was interesting about my review of the Analog Pocket is that you can play a game, download your Pokemon data, make a memory save, and then take the cartridge apart, replace the battery, and then reload it. And so it's fascinating for people that grew up with Pokemon and played it for a long time, and they still have their old Pokemon, characters that they've been playing for a great many years. So it's funny that people will have this connection to their old game saves.
Well, I didn't know the analog pocket can do stuff like this. I really didn't have an idea.
Well, the analog and also the Retron 5. That's one where people will go and copy the game to the game data. And then there's also USB card readers. Will go and people, have their card into a USB reader and use it on a computer. And then I saw this one madman that what he was doing is actually like he had a game and actually opened it in like on a cartridge and was actually replacing the battery on like a working game. And I'm like, that's crazy, but that's impressive.
Yeah, I guess that's possible. The battery is holding just the save file, so I guess if you are careful. And can you tell us something about your future projects?
Sure. I'm currently working on 3 different videos right now in various stages. The first is Garbage Pail Kids, which is a new game, a retro game that was made for NES and also released on PlayStation and Switch. Then I'm doing a video on the Konami GB collection, which is where Konami took games and released 4 of them on a cartridge, and they would make Super Game Boy enhanced versions so it has like different colors and whatnot on the Super Game Boy. And so I'm doing a video on that. And then I also like Japanese anime. One second. Oh, I took it over. So I'm doing a video on Japanese Nintendo games based on Japanese anime. And it's funny because often the video games are very good, or the anime is good, but back in the 80s, the idea of having a good game based on a licensed property was rare. So people would, these companies would say, okay, we got a license to make a game, but we have a very small budget and a very small time and make a game really fast. And they didn't care that it was good. And so there's, I'm glad to see that games have gotten more time to make good ones. But that's what I was saying is like, okay, so watch the anime and here's a game that's based on it, but be warned that the game is not very good. But it's not based bad. But I also think that no one sets out to make a bad game. It's just that they're faced with the technical limitations and the time, and time is money, and time development is money. So if you're doing game development for a living, you don't have, you have a short amount of time. Like how many years did you work on your game?
Well, I work on my game like 1.5 years full time, and I think 1 year like side project. But it was my first game, and the scale of the game is super big, super large. So it took me really a long time.
But it's very impressive, and you did it. But
for sure, there are people who can make it faster than me, but I don't recommend no one to start making game like this. This is too big for one person, and you're gonna regret.
Well, a lot of times people start they see some of the first games are simple, and that people have to realize that it's like complexity is time. The complexity and time and money, it's all connected for people, the amount of time that people put on it. So like bad games, I don't think people who made them set out to make bad games. They just didn't have a lot of time to make it as good, or the resources to make it as good as they could. Yeah. So there were some earlier YouTubers that I find very influential, like James Rolfe, the angry video game nerd. And there's all these people who are like, oh, you can these old games are shitty, and we're gonna play them and talk about how bad they are. And so over the years, that have sort of changed. So now I'm like saying, okay, here's a game, and I like it. And so it's more people talking about making YouTube videos about old games from the perspective of liking them.
And what people are supposed to do if they want to support you?
Best way to support me is to subscribe on YouTube. It's fascinating. I do this as a hobby, and I do this, and people who are serious about it, I know that I'll never actually make a lot of money doing this. And so it's fascinating. I met some of my retro video game YouTube people that I respect at a convention, and I found out that they have jobs. and you know, I might make, you know, $100 after several hundred of months of work. But best way is support someone is watch their videos and like them, because some popularity works on to go on others and get more people watching the stuff. So definitely please watch my videos. That's the best way to help me.
And do you have some lesser known consoles that deserve recognition?
All right, I'm back. So lesser known consoles that a lot of people don't know about. So there's the NEC PC Engine, which was actually brought to the US as a TurboGrafx 16. And there was so many awesome games made for it that did not get very popular in the US. And so definitely sort of glad that people are catching on to TurboGrafx 16 and PC Engine. I wish I could go back and tell my childhood self, stop selling your old video games to buy newer game systems. Because I started with a Nintendo NES, and then I sold that to buy a Sega Genesis, and then I think I sold that to buy a TurboGrafx, and then I sold that to get a Super Nintendo. And so in doing so, I would get more money and I'd sell my old stuff. And so I experienced a whole bunch of different game systems. But I wish I could go back and tell myself, stop selling the old games, keep them around. And then there was this time around 1998 to like 2005, where there's all these old games and people didn't really think they were retro, but they weren't considered cool and in demand. And my job changed, and I went back to school and went to become a nurse. And I sold my old video game collection. And I wish I didn't do that, because there was no way I could ever get those again. And so there was this magic time where there's just old and not worth it. You could get these incredible games for like $5, $10. And now there are hundreds. So the game system that I think more Americans need to experience is the Famicom. This is not an NES. This is an AV Famicom. And there's all these great games that are for the Nintendo Famicom that I think more people need to experience and check out. Thank you very much. I had a good time. Do let me know when your episode goes live, and I look forward to watching it.
Okay, and thank you for coming.